in fiction across many different mediums or media. For example, like well, think in terms of characters. Most stories have these basic characters, like a hero, a villain, a mentor, a love interest, a supporting characters who help the hero on their journey, that kind of thing. And those have, of course, variations over time and different subversions of them. But broadly speaking, they have these elements in general. When it comes to plot, there's usually um, well, okay, there is like a large plot structure, like with inciting incident and conflict and resolution and climax and things like that. But even within that, I mean, depending on your story, you could have like a moment where the hero appears to lose, and then they come back in a grand finale, or where I don't know. I'm not thinking things off the top of my head. Those kind of common elements that you see in a lot of different stories. I mean, across many genres, across many media, those are what we might broadly call as tropes. If you need more specific examples, I encourage you go to tvtropes.com right now and do some browsing. You might fall into an internet hole and get sucked into a vacuum for a while. So do that at your own risk. But tvtropes.com will tell you all about tropes if you want to, if you want more of them. And we kind of hear people complaining about tropes these days. I mean, if a story or a movie relies too much on tropes, we say it feels generic or unoriginal. An example that I've heard recently, and this is a little controversial. I'm not saying it's my opinion. Okay, it is my opinion, but I'm also saying the opinion is out there that, for example, The Force Awakens, Star Wars: The Force Awakens, the first of the new Star Wars movies. Some people say it was largely just a copy or a repetition of tropes from A New Hope, from the first Star Wars movie ever. And yes, they rearranged some things in different ways, but broadly speaking, as far as broad tropes go, I kind of agree. It was very similar. It didn't feel original to me. And the question is that good or bad? Is it good to have tropes? Is it bad to have too many of them? That kind of thing. We can debate about all that. And of course, there's no one clear answer. It kind of depends on the situation. Kind of depends on your opinion and your perception there, and how they're used, I think. I mean, there is, of course, in fiction and fandom, some complaining about using tropes too much. But there's kind of been a backlash against that too. Like, I saw a meme going around. You can probably find it if you search online, or a meme or a tweet that basically says, like, the problem with sites like TV Tropes is that then people start complaining about stories having tropes in them, which is a little bit like complaining that a tree is made of wood. In other words, that person was saying stories are made of tropes, like these common elements that I mentioned, like a hero, a villain, the characters, the plot, the setting, even if they're a little generic, or even if they've been done before. That's what stories are made of. Like, it's not bad to, at least that person was saying, it's not bad to have some tropes. It depends on how they're used. And I kind of agree with that. So basically, I can't give you a simple yes or no answer to, is it good or bad to have tropes. I mean, pretty much all stories have some tropes, and even if you're talking about like the first story in a certain genre, like one that was once original, like, again, Star Wars in its genre, or Lord of the Rings per se in its genre, even if you're looking at those, they have, and even if they were original for their time, which they largely were, although they drew from other influences too, they still have elements that have now become tropes if they weren't already. And like, so people reading Lord of the Rings today, some might say it's. I mean, I don't say this, but some might say it feels tropey or generic, or some things do. I said that about the First Wheel of Time book, which is in some ways similar to Lord of the Rings. Um, anyway, my point is, even these great stories have tropes, even if they didn't even if they weren't tropes yet when they first came out. They are now, because so many others try to emulate them. So it's not bad. Okay. I'm transitioning from summarizing the ideas out there to giving you my ideas, specifically. It's not bad to have some tropes. I mean, if you write a story, you can't avoid having some tropes. The question is, when do you use them? How do you use them? Do you know how to use them sparingly? Do you know how to use them in the right way to convey something familiar to your reader, or do you use them in the wrong way to try to fill in things that shouldn't be filled in with tropes? I'll try to give you some examples. My story, Fractured Heroes, It's a superhero story. It's genre fiction. Superhero. Well, I guess the broader genre is science fiction, but superhero is now kind of a pretty prevalent subgenre within that. And I'm kind of trusting my readers. Sorry, looks like the video went out again. Let me make sure it's on. It still says it's live. Okay. Um, Sorry, I'm having internet troubles today. Um, okay, I think it's still working. Um, okay, yeah, I'll keep going. I'll pretend that didn't happen. Okay, so when I write my superhero story, I'm largely, in some ways, trusting my readers that they're familiar with the genre. I mean, most people are today. Most people have seen at least some Marvel movies and such. And if you're reading my story, you're probably familiar with the superhero genre. I mean, in theory, there could be someone who has never watched a superhero movie before, but I'm guessing that person wouldn't start with my story, or a relatively obscure story, unless it was like my grandma or someone who I just gave my story to. But in general, what I'm saying is, someone who's reading my story, they've probably seen some Marvel movies. They probably maybe read a few comics. They're probably familiar, at least a little bit, if not a lot, with superhero stories. So like there are some tropes that I can rely on, that I can just kind of use and expect the reader will get. For example, the superpower formula that people get their powers from, sometimes called a MacGuffin in science fiction and fantasy. Um, it's you know in my story, there's some kind of chemical formula that gives people their powers. I don't really go into the scientific details of explaining how it works, how it was created, or why it's there. And there's a few reasons for that. I'm not really a science guy. Science fiction, yes. Real science, not quite my area. Um, Two, it's not important to plot. But three, I expect my readers to get this already. Yeah, yes, it's a trope. Having some kind of superpower formula is a trope, but I'm like, it's not important to my story to explain where this came from, how it works. I gave it a little bit, like this one scientific company developed it using DNA from the White Knight, who was the first superhero in my world. Um, so I give it a brief science fiction explanation, but I don't need to go into details because my reader gets it. Someone who's familiar with superhero stories, they get it, they understand, and they know the story works like that. There is some suspension of disbelief you can have when you utilize a familiar trope in that way, when explaining it isn't super necessary to the story. My friends and I have joked just using generic terminology like science particles and like the science chemical, just things like that don't actually make sense in real life, but in fiction, in certain genres of fiction, you have a suspension of disbelief. You can understand that. Again, my powers. I said before, my characters' powers aren't that special. I mean, I think what's different about my story is the characters, their personalities, they're real characters, but their powers are ones that have been done before. I have a guy with super strength. It's an ensemble cast, but arguably the main character has super strength. So when I say he has super strength, the reader isn't asking like, "What do you mean super strength?" Like I'm not familiar with that term. I mean, if you've read a comic book before or watched a Marvel movie, you're familiar with super strength. That's a trope, but it works for this kind. A couple more things I've done it with, and you could argue, you could debate about whether these are good uses or not. I think they work for my story for now. Then again, I'm not published yet. Still trying to pitch it to people, so that maybe jury might be out on that one. The setting of my story, I might do a future video discussion about world building and setting and things like that. I'm not much of a world builder, at least in this area. I haven't been. So my story takes place in a city, a big city, a fictional big city, like a superhero story often would. And then people are asking me like what's the city like, or what's on this street corner, or can you describe it more? I'm like, it's a city, like it's a big urban city, like that's where superhero stories take place. It's like New York, where Spider-Man lives, or something like that, or Gotham City or Metropolis, but like it's a big city. And they're like, yeah, but can you describe it more? And I'm like, it's not important to the story. It's a city. So that's kind of a trope. Just expecting superheroes to live in a big city. I mean, I guess it kind of works. I mean, some would argue I still need to flesh out my setting a little bit more in revisions. Maybe I will, but the city is there. The setting is there. It's kind of a backdrop more than an important plot point, I would say. Another thing, kind of that I use for my genre is in a backstory. Also, arguably my main character. He at some point in his backstory in a flashback, he has his grandma dies. She's killed by one of the villains who he had double crossed, basically. Um, and he's kind of like the Uncle Ben character who died, and it makes our hero feel guilty about that, and is at least part of what drives him to fight crime afterward. And honestly, my story has so many backstories already, so many flashbacks. I need to cut them down. I need to whittle them down. I'm working on that gradually. But I was like, people get this, so we arguably this may or may not be a good idea. But I didn't even show the grandma in a scene with the boy before she died. I mentioned her off screen, and then basically showed him finding her dead. So like, I didn't even have like a moment of dialogue between them to show their relationship. I just showed him finding her dead, and I feel like the reader can infer that from that moment in this character's life, um, that that this is part of what drove him to become a crime fighter. I didn't feel like I needed to develop the grandma's character because she's not a character really. She's she's a character, but a flat character, one who gets cut off pretty quickly, and that's kind of her purpose in the story, like the Uncle Ben or Bruce Wayne's parents or something like that. So yeah, some might say there's greater emotional impact with the reader if I had fleshed her out more, and maybe we'll see if I do want to do that in revisions. But for now, I'm just like I have too many backstories already. Can't tell them all at once. It's not about her. It's not her story. Sorry, it's the boy's story, the young man's story. So I use a trope of a familiar scene, at least familiar to the readers of my genre, to convey hopefully what will be a clear development for this character. So those are some times that at least I think we're good to use tropes. Again, some of them maybe are the jury is still out on, but I think so. So I'd say you can use a trope to convey to your reader something that's familiar, and you use it intentionally. You should be aware of what tropes are, at least a little bit. But be aware that you're using it, and be aware that that's not the main part of your story, but it's something that will be familiar to your reader if you put it in there. What you shouldn't use tropes for I'd say, is character development. Each character needs to be their own real person, at least each main character, and at least each semi-major character. If it's one you're just going to kill off, maybe not. Again, we can debate about minor characters too, but each major to semi-major character needs to be fleshed out and real, and you shouldn't rely on tropes for that. Yes, you can maybe some elements in their backstory could be tropes, but you want to develop them into their own real characters. You want the reader to feel like they're real characters. So, these characters they've had arguably tropey things happen to them. Yes. There's only so many plot points you can do in someone's life, like a parent dying, or a lover breaking up with you, or a traumatic event in your past, that kind of thing. These things have been done before. Again, you can't quite get away from them, but you can flesh your characters out to make them real. So what I'm saying is, use tropes when you have to. Be aware that you're using them, but then flesh out your characters beyond that. Make sure the characters are still real. And I talked elsewhere about character creation. That's a different topic, but don't rely overly on tropes for your characters. Don't be like, oh, he's a hero. Okay, yes, he's a hero, but like, what's his personality like? You can't just say he's the hero. You have to give him a personality. You have to give him a motivation, a driving force, that kind of thing. Same for your villains these days. When people expect villains to be at least somewhat fleshed out, you can't be like, oh, he's the trope of the villain. Nope. The villain needs to have a motivation, a personality, that kind of thing too. So make sure you flesh those things out. I would say also don't use tropes to do a major plot point. Again, maybe for minor plot points, like in the backstory, that can work. Like I just mentioned the example in the origin story. But a trope can't replace your final battle or anything like that, or your climax. Again, tropes happen. You can't get away from that sometimes. But it needs to be fleshed out beyond just the trope. It needs to feel real. It needs to be its own thing. If it's not, it'll feel like a plot device or a gimmick, and readers don't like that. If it's just a trope, I'm trying to think of an example. If things fall together too easily, like if the hero just easily finds whatever he needs, or easily defeats the bad guy, then we're like, oh, it's too easy. It's not emotionally satisfying. It feels also generic or whatever, or can. So avoid that. I heard a principal in creative writing class years ago. It wasn't about tropes specifically, but we were working with coincidences. Like we had to write a story with a coincidence in it, and kind of the general principle was a coincidence can begin a story, like a reader can suspend disbelief enough to like oh, this coincidence happened and it kicks off this interesting story. But you really shouldn't use a coincidence or a convenient plot device like that to end a story or to resolve a story, because the reader feels like that's cheap. So I might broadly suggest the same thing about tropes. You can use them at the beginning, maybe you can use them in the backstory to an extent, but don't overuse them, and don't use them at the pivotal moments, like major turning points, climax, resolution. Those need to be fleshed out and real and be your own thing. So that's my broad advice about tropes. Would be use them when you have to. I mean, again, if you're writing a story, especially genre fiction, but even like literary fiction these days, I feel like you can't get away from some tropes. I mean, there's always something. Like every story has been told out there. There's nothing new under the sun. It's been said. Writing is just kind of rearranging old things in a new way. I mean, my story obviously is not completely original. In case you were under any delusions, it pulls from a genre. It's in many ways my love letter to Marvel and DC. But yeah, so I mean, your story's going to have some tropes. You pretty much can't get away from that. And if you can, I don't know what I'm going to say. But 99% of us can't get away from that. But the question is, are you using them sparingly enough? Are you like do you know when you can use them and when you can't? So yeah, I'll just rehash. Then I'll try to rehash quickly. Then I'll try to stop rambling. So use tropes if you want to convey something to your reader that you think they're familiar with already, but it's not the main point of your story. Like for me, superpower formulas. It's a plot device basically. It's a vehicle of the genre. It's not the main plot point. Backstories, origins, setting, not the main point to me. I used tropes for those. You can do that as long as you know what you're doing, and as long as you're aware of it and use it sparingly. Do not use tropes, or do not over rely on tropes for character development or major plot points. I mean, again, yes, you'll have some tropes in those areas, but develop your characters and your plot beyond the tropes to make them real, make them their own thing. Don't just rely on tropes and think you can get away with it. One more quick point I'll make that I mentioned earlier. Another time you can use a trope, obviously, is if you're doing like a satire or a parody or a critique of something, maybe, and you're intentionally using the trope to make fun of it or to subvert it. Those are always fun. Parodies. I've dabbled in parody, not very seriously. Some of my friends and I wrote a fan fiction story years ago. We were just trying to. I mean, it was over the top. It was silly, but we were just trying to combine as many different tropes as we could into one story. But in that case, of course, we were making fun of them. We have a friend who writes silly stories. She's written a satire of like the teen supernatural romance and things like that. And of course, she's making fun of the tropes. So another good time to use tropes is when you're aware of it, to poke fun at them or subvert them. But in general, use them when you have to. Don't use them too much. And when you find that balance, your writing will flourish for it, and you'll have the focus in the right parts. Your readers will understand what you want them to understand, but still feel surprised and emotionally invested in everything at the right parts. So I hope that helps. Yeah, hope that was useful to you. One quick announcement before I sign off. A week from today, actually, a week from tomorrow, it'll be Saturday, August 28th. I'm doing another event. I'm doing an author interview with my friend Tess Martinus. Tess has been a long time literature professor. Also, she currently teaches creative writing. She's written at least one novel called Sam's Town. I helped edit it. It's a zombie novel. The name is just coincidence that happens to have my name, Sam. Coincidence as far as I know, but I read this in early stages and helped her edit it and things like that, and I thought it was really good. And now she's put a published version. She's also done a podcast now about literature and literature in the broad sense, about story and genre and things like that. And I actually did a superhero episode for her podcast, which will be airing soon. So that's my friend Tess Martinez. The book says Tess Toxico, that was her maiden name, but it's now Tess Martinez. I have an event on this page that you can sign up for, so go to the event page, sign up. I'm doing a live chat with her to talk about her writing work and podcasts and everything, and I'm doing that next Saturday, August 28th, around the same time, or actually around 11 CST, noon EST. So be there, find the event page, and join us for the discussion. If you want more writing content from me and from this group, then sign up for the link. There's a link in the video description, the Chippermaker link. You'll get updates, writing content from me, and more. Until then, have a great weekend. Keep writing and reading and rocking, and I'll see you later. Thanks. Bye.